because sometimes I share a Dropbox and everybody's organizing and going, so I'm glad you're setting it up and that we all keep it straight.
And the person I communicated with on K through 5, I said,
Mathematics,
if you would like to
6
put
through
your own
12
K through
October
5 stuff
3rd.
in there,
a.m.
you know, and designated as such so that we're not looking through too much.
Right. Well, I guess it's 8, a few minutes after 8, and I believe we have a quorum here that we can go ahead and get started. So, and you talked about we need to really address and make sure by the end of the day that we address some of those K through 5, those issues so that we can get them K through 5 and I agree. We have on our agenda that we talked when we left yesterday, that we were going to look at the Common Core and say what we liked and didn't like, kind of go through that for 7 and 8 and try our best to get that done before we adjourn for people to go to the meeting. So if there's no objections, shall we go ahead and move forward with that? And then, yeah. Okay, so let's start with, and I think we talked about the 6th grade document itself, but I don't think that we can really, if somebody has something, but we already talked about the Common Core 6th grade document prior to this, but if we still have some things to bring up, so what discussion do we have?
Well, I have the 6th grade, we discussed this last week, but I wanted to make sure that.
Hey, all right.
You can see it, this year.
I can see what you're talking about, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I left every light and Joe said go.
Yeah.
Am I late for those ADD kids?
I'm sorry, it was just crazy, go ahead.
Last week, we did mention it, but I want to make sure that it's part of our conversation this week since we were talking about it yesterday, that 6 NSD 2 and 3 fluently divide multi-digit numbers with the standard algorithm or something to that effect. But make sure that we're dividing multi-digit numbers.
Yes.
And whether we say fluently, accurately, and efficiently, whatever that word, or what, add, subtract, multiply, and divide multi-digit decimals, okay? And it says using the standard algorithm, but I want to make sure that we are addressing the decimals and addressing the multi-digit whole numbers. Then, do you care if I go on?
Yeah, go ahead.
On 6EE, C9, this is something that I think is pretty important for us to connect to science with, and it is to make sure kids can write just a real simple dependent-independent variable relationship equation, and that's what C9 is about.
And that's, I had that circled with exactly the same thing, the connections to science, and I know right now, middle school teachers, 6th grade, that's something that they really push.
Yes.
So
We talked a little bit about that.
We mentioned it, but I wanted to make sure that, because we also talked about multi-variable other places, you know.
Right.
I also think that's good as we start to graph
Mm-hmm.
when
Yes,
that connection.
absolutely, and Julie and I
Because we
were
had some
talking-
trouble with, in the past, we've had some trouble with that. On the dependent, independent variables
Yes.
on the graphs.
Yeah.
Julie and I were talking that we think it's important both for physical sciences and life sciences. So
Absolutely.
no matter how those curriculums sometimes
Right.
are in different orders at different school districts, I think
Right.
it could still apply at 6th grade.
I totally agree.
That's all I had on 6th.
And the one thing, when I looked at it, I want to make sure that if we don't put it in somehow, well, it's already there, but in, let's see, 6NS, 6C, I really like that they really are pointing out the both vertical and horizontal number lines.
Yes.
Because I think if we don't do a really good job of both vertical and horizontal, because some people have a tendency to sort of focus on one over the other, we're really setting our kids up for issues in the coordinate plane. So I really hope we, even though sometimes we feel like it's prescriptive, I think sometimes if we don't say some things like that, that it may not get done. So
It'll be horizontal.
there you go.
Just to check, I like that Nancy went back and, made sure we had those operations with decimals. What about those same operations with fractions?
Fluency.
Is that a fifth grade?
Well, we talked that fractions, that we would, wanted them to do all operations at some point with all types of numbers depending, but the fractions, we said that we would, what I heard was, we would finish it up with the division. That the addition, subtraction, and multiplication were expected to be in elementary.
I didn't have that in my notes, and I knew we talked about it, and I can't remember what.
I'm not sure, but the issue you bring up is like fluently that they're able to do it with automatic testing, and I'm not sure where it says that in the document, or if sixth grade is the appropriate place, but at some point, they need to be able to fluently work, at whatever our definition of word is. Any other discussion on sixth grade?
One thing I wanted to, at least talk about a little bit, I know that, we haven't tried to worry too much about the way that we write our categories, but in this document, this is just something that really sort of bugs me. They have, categories, and this is both 5 and 6. They have number and operations in base 10, and then there's number and operations fractions, and actually before that, there's operations and algebraic thinking. So you've got 3 times where you have operations. Now that doesn't bother me so much, but where it says base 10, I sort of look around and I'm thinking, okay, so is there something else that we're doing a different base? And so, I've not found it. If it is there, I certainly missed it. But I think what they mean is the decimal system. Fractions are also base 10.
Yeah.
And I feel like, even though, I mean, I get that that might be sort of a minor point in a way, but again, I'm sort of a stickler for vocabulary and the way that we use words, and I know that we won't be perfect, but I want us to be really careful with that.
Is that with fifth grade?
That's
That's
it.
it.
It's in fifth, well, it's the
Yeah, it's-
category,
It's number system, I think, in sixth grade.
yeah, so,
It's
I mean, so again, I feel like what they mean is the decimal system, that's pretty clear to me.
It is when you read it, yeah.
And I just don't think, and that's fine, except I just don't think we should call that, base 10, because that's not really what base 10 means, so.
Send a note to those fifth graders.
Yeah, that's,
Well, and I don't think we, ever sit down and talk about it, and that's one thing we will have to talk about is categories and how we're gonna categorize consistency so that we flow through things, but that's a good point too. Anything else about sixth grade?
I think everything was actually covered in both Massachusetts and in this document. I went through and looked at all of them, and we talked about everything in one place or another.
I think the one thing we'll have to be careful of across the board is after because I think we're making great progress with it, I think this fits here and this fits here, is that we don't overload one particular grade and have a little bit, just in case that we start writing and we're like, holy cow, we expect sixth graders to do this much in that amount of time.
Well, and I think that's where we all come back to the table and say, to come back to professional, so, because when you're placing things and moving and shifting, sometimes you're absolutely right, Tiffany, you overlook things like that. And we want to go deeper,
balance as well.
we want to go deeper into it, so our kids really understand what they're doing, not just that they've memorized these things that they can forget tomorrow, because that's what's unfortunately goes on a lot. So are we ready to move on to seventh grade?
I have one,
Go for it, Lindsay.
7GB5. I want to make sure that we understand, we touched on it yesterday, but use facts about supplementary, complementary, vertical and adjacent angles, and solving problems, solving equations, et cetera with those. I don't think that we specified all of those types of angles, so are we okay with that?
Yes.
On that same strand, 7G2, does that fit better in sixth or seventh?
Well, I think, well, I think we talked about the compass and the circle thing, since it's circles, that's why I think we were talking about leaving it in seventh grade. Because it matches with the idea of circles.
And I think we were gonna talk about OR technology, we were gonna do the OR technology.
Right, I just didn't know when it was talking about all the triangle stuff, I didn't know if we were thinking that that would be 5 or 6 or 7. I don't know, it would be.
One of the things I really like is 7NS 1A, describe situations in which opposite quantities combine to make 0. That is really something, I don't know about the rest of the experience of that, but that's really something that when in high school, it is amazing how they cannot do that. And we don't start early enough, I think, with that. And I really like it. Sometimes I don't like necessarily what we've talked about prescriptive things, but I think that sometimes it's very overlooked in middle school, and so I really like the fact that they pointed that out.
I'm sorry, which one? 7NS?
7NS 1A.
1A, okay.
And then going on to 1B, they do more distance about locating the distance, the absolute value of P from P. The P is key for them to really understand that conceptually. I think they've done a pretty nice job in getting into absolute value and applications.
No, I agree. Describe situations in which opposite quantities combine to make 0. I think that's super important. I did bristle at that example, however.
Well, yeah, the example,
It's not
it's
good.
an EG, right?
No, so
FBEG.
we feel there should be an example, then there should be a different example.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with a lot of, sometimes when I look at some of the examples,
Yeah.
is that really what we want? Because when you put an example in, that's what the teachers are going to do and think that's all that they're going to do.
Yeah, and I think that example is sort of wrong, so.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we pretty well covered what was
Yeah, I
in
think so too.
here, we said to include all of it.
Right. Okay, any other discussion about 7th grade?
Well, one
Yeah.
question, sorry,
Go ahead.
before we go on C on that,
On 7NS 1C,
7NF1C.
okay,
I just had a little note here, and I don't, this is really more a question for, the middle school people too, because I don't know, I think sometimes you hear math teachers say, well, there's not really any such thing as subtraction, you're just adding negative. And I have also heard math teachers say, you need to be careful and talk about when you are doing a subtraction and when you're adding a negative number. And although that, if you're using at least certain kinds of TI calculators, that's sort of true. But I don't see the logic of that myself personally, and so I guess I'm asking the group, what do we think about that? Or is my question even clear?
Well, I'm not sure. I think that, we know that subtraction and adding the opposite is the equivalent thing.
mhm,
But I think there are times in context where subtraction is the idea.
Yeah,
So I think I think there needs to be, it's okay to make those equivalent, but sometimes the subtraction is the idea that fits the context.
right.
so, but yeah, and I guess my question is, at what point do kids, so we know that, that there's at least no computational difference for sure. At what point are kids expected to understand that? Because isn't that what 1C is saying?
I think integers aren't really introduced until 7th grade. And so, right, but
Operations.
because of that, then I don't think it makes much sense to do it any lower. You know
But
what I
is
mean?
it okay to do it at this level? I guess that's what I'm, so understanding that subtracting 7 and adding -7 are the
I
same
think so.
thing at this level.
I think so.
Okay.
And you start them out, Julie, with something like 10 minus 3. So say, do you know what 10 minus 3 is? Can you take 10 objects here, can you take away 3 of them? And then it's usually with 2 color counters or with something else, you say 10 positives and 3 negatives. What's that equal to? And you do that enough that then they can generalize that
And I
it's
think it is okay. I had somebody say, you know, this was several years ago, that it was it was a high school class. And it was another teacher that said, you know, you have to be super careful when you're talking to kids about, you know, whether you say -7 or -7. And that in that particular context of it, I didn't feel comfortable asking this person why, but I've never understood it.
Well, I think one of the reasons is because, if students think that every negative sign is a subtraction,
Yeah.
when you get into multiplication, you have all kinds of problems. In other words, they see 3 times -2 in parentheses, they think 3 minus 2.
Or if you're
Yeah,
distributing a
then you
negative
would
number.
say negative.
So I mean, there are times when that distinction is important, when it's not about addition.
Okay, and I don't think that's whether it's fine.
In covering negative numbers in your commutative properties in 7th grade, we were stating positive integers.
Seventh
Seventh
grade, sixth grade is positive, sixth grade is knowing the numbers, but seventh grade is operations.
Okay.
So seventh grade is where the operations come in. So you really want them to understand what integers are in sixth grade before they move on to dealing with the operations.
Yeah, that's something I work with my elementary, middle school teachers is to really, early on, especially elementary teachers, early on, subtraction is an operation, negative is part of the number.
Right.
And so in that regard, I mean, I know eventually that when we're doing subtraction, we can always think of it as adding negative, but we need to not think of that subtraction because as Nancy said, when we start doing distributed property and things, what is that subtraction? It's an operation. So there are times when we need to really make that distinction.
And Bob, I like what you said about that, because I've never really thought about phrasing, because that's one of the reasons why our students have -2 squared comes out to -4,
Right.
instead of realizing.
And negative is part of that too.
Right, that it's really a part of it too, so I like the way you phrase that.
And that's how I do it, and I just,
Yeah.
you know, but that's, you know, at an upper level, is that where you start, and that's really, I don't know, because for me it is, you know, you can rearrange numbers, you can do all these fun things as long as you keep the sign
Has to go with it.
in front, especially if it's a negative, you know, with that number. So
And we teach that in 7th grade too, and then they'll say, is that a subtracting 4, or is that like adding the opposite of 4?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about, like in language and so simplified equivalencies, that those are equivalencies. Okay, 15 minutes later, we changed it.
So he's having to climb up.
He isn't
there.
a climb
Poor guy.
up to
Yeah.
do that, oh my
Well,
gosh.
it's taking him so long.
Yeah, we need to get him.
So
Good
this is
stuff.
maybe some of Mr. Grisham candy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I really, because I think using the word equivalency, equivalent expressions, equivalent equations,
Yeah.
equivalence is a big push, and we haven't done that in the past, and I think that's a really good thing.
Well, and I think using the word opposite more often, I think as 7th grade teachers, we tend to say negative
Yeah.
way more often than opposite.
Mhm.
And then the kids get negative in grade, and then that's why we see the -2 squared as opposed to the opposite of 2 squared.
And especially when you haven't done letters or variables, it's the opposite of x, not negative x. You know, think about that, it's the opposite of x, because no matter what x is, it's the opposite of what
It's
x
not necessarily, yeah, and some teachers do a very good job of making that distinction, and some teachers have just never thought about it and
Right,
don't.
right. And Nancy, what you said about the 2 color counters and that, I think it really makes sense when if they really talk about the situations, opposite quantities combined to 0, because I know so often they don't realize that, and so I think that makes a good action. Anything else on 7? Okay, so are we ready to move on to 8? Okay.
My question on page 54, AEE 2. Talks about using square root and cube root symbols know and apply properties of integer exponents to generate equivalent numerical expressions. Does that include integer exponents or variables or unknowns?
I'm sorry, zero.
She's on 1.
One.
One, I was on 1, I was not 2, I'm sorry.
Okay, say your question one more time.
My bubble was in the wrong spot. We're talking about integer exponents. Would we use those same integer exponents with unknowns or variables as well? Or is it just numerical? I guess I'm trying to figure out at what level do we teach
Right.
the,
Really bad things.
exponent rules?
That's a good question.
In other words, instead of just saying three squared times 3 to the third is 3 to the fifth, we would do x squared times x.
That's a very, right.
Do you currently do that at the school?
At the very end of the year.
It would make
But-
sense to me to do that.
But I think they can do it.
Yeah.
I do think they can do it. The only reason it's at the very end of the year right now is just because we have other stuff.
But that is a really important distinction because
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I have college students who know that x squared times x cubed is x to the fifth, and when I give them 2 cubed squared times 2 cubed, it's 4 to the fifth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the time.
So,
All the time.
I think at this level, this is just me, when I'm thinking about standards for every student, and it's the first time they've come across integer exponents, that keeping it with numerical expressions makes sense, so that they can kind of connect to it.
And maybe if they
Yeah.
spend the time doing that, then they won't run into the issue with the variables.
And once they've connected, then when they move to their algebra course, then they can apply it to variables. That was my thought, but
I don't know, that's why I'm asking which place it would be.
I think that's okay, Matt. I don't have a problem.
I think the way that it currently is, they catch on to variables, those properties, when using variables easier. But it's probably because they're not changing the base that way. You know what I mean? And they're not changing the base the other way, but they come up with a whole new number. So to them, they're not seeing that connection as well. But, I mean, I'm fine with it either way.
Yeah, I think it is, I agree with Nancy, and I think it's best to start with numbers. So,
Yeah.
Well, and if we don't have to do variables there, then we have more time to go into it more in depth so that they do understand.
So, yeah, so they really do understand that, because that's huge, that, as Bob said, is that they can do x squared times x to the third, get x to the fifth, but 2 squared times 2 to the third is 4 to the fifth. So, if more time was really spent, they could really understand that. I think we'd all be better off. And then include, like it talks about knowing applied properties of integer exponents. That the one thing about the example is that we might want to make sure that, I don't know, if we want to do -3 squared, -3 quantity squared, the difference in that. And maybe we might be too explicit in that. So like -3 quantity squared is opposed to -3 squared. Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Is there anything else? Great, yeah.
just one, we mentioned it yesterday in a couple different spots, but I don't think we explicitly looked at AEEB5, which is about graphing with proportional relationships so that the unit rate is the slope of the graph. We talked about when comparing 2 different ones, but I think we need to make sure that we're clear that we do want them understanding what a proportional relationship is. We mentioned it, but and that we do want them comparing different ones, comparing the slopes of those, and then extending it later on when they get to the functions with the y equals mx plus b, and making sure that we are having them do that from find an equation from 2 points, or find one from, and just comparing all of those different representations.
Yeah, because right now that, I think, is lacking. We don't do a really good job of that. So, yeah, good point.
I think yesterday we talked about, doing, where you interpret the slope, this would go right there.
Yeah.
Looking at these would be great. And actually I like those examples too, so.
On the one underneath that, Nancy, did you say something yesterday about how there was something with similar triangles to explain why the slope was the same between 2 points? Didn't you say something about not liking that yesterday?
I just think it's a little too prescriptive. I mean, I think that's one method of doing it, but it's not, it's one of my least favorite things in this
I
document.
agree with
I
that.
agree too.
I put an X through it, but
I second.
I agree with that X.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good way to do it, it's not the only way to do it.
yes.
Well, and then, using methods to show, but not necessarily being so prescriptive about what that is. I agree.
I liked that on 7A, I liked moving, number of solutions. Last year was the first year I taught that in 8th grade, and I really liked it.
Say it again, please.
On 7A,
Yes.
I like that it has, stating the number of solutions, whether it has one solution, infinitely many, or no. I
Yes.
really like that a lot.
Mhm.
And that's something that didn't used to be there, so I would like to keep it there.
And I guess I'll just add to that, this is one situation where I do feel that the word variable is misleading.
Yeah.
That it really should be unknown or some equivalent.
Yeah. So, and I think we brought that up, but
Right.
yeah, but I think you're right that we need to be careful about making sure that's clear. Anything else?
On page 55, 8F4. My comment when I was going over it last night was, do we need to change the wording on this? And it has Bob in parentheses.
It's what if it's.
You,
Bob.
because something in
You're in
it,
parentheses, Bob.
something in it made me think that
Like
you
Bob.
did, because initial value, because we spent some time
Oh,
talking
yes.
about initial value yesterday.
Yeah, sometimes it's not the initial value in the context, so,
What,
I mean, it's the value of y and x is 0.
and which one are we on here?
Number 4.
8F4.
8F4 on page 55.
So it says to determine the initial value.
Yeah, sometimes it is the initial, well, sometimes the initial value of the context is not the y-intercept.
And it says in terms of situation models.
Well, I think it's okay
So
then.
I was,
I think that's all right.
okay,
Bob gives approval.
fantastic.
I just-
Although, I don't disagree, but, are we being less than very clear
Yes,
for
I
our
think we might need to
teachers?
clarify this.
Clarify. yeah.
So-
That the initial value may not be the y-intercept, I mean,
So-
it may need to be something, an e.g.
You
there.
could,
No.
We put X's for things.
so maybe something like initial value and or y-intercept,
Yeah.
and slash or y-intercept,
right.
that help clarify.
I think so.
It might not always be the.
Right, and I really like that they use the rate of change. You know,
Yes.
using that, yeah, I really like the fact that they're using that.
Kathy, I'd like, to move that we kind of accept the recommendations that we've done yesterday and today with the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade,
Mhm.
using the 2 documents. And have our liaisons report to the,
Or take it
no, to the State Board of Education in their report, that we've used the 2 documents to come up with what we think are best for Missouri students. Explanation, well, if someone wants a second, if they don't, I understand.
I'll second that.
And the reason is, I think it's important for them to know that we've looked at what we think are the best documents and we've tweaked them and put what we think's best for Missouri students there.
I like that language, very much so, but clarification as to, so what we've done is we've looked at these and I mean, obviously we don't have a first draft, but what we have is a plan for a first draft, is that a fair way to put it?
Yes.
So we're thinking that we have a plan for a first draft that we have based on these 2 different standards as well as our own ideas and experiences that we've shared and things like that. Is that?
And really made it fit for what we think's best for Missouri kids.
So I would say.
Yeah. So Julie, did you second the
I
motion?
would say.
Oh, Bob already did? Oh.
That's okay.
So
Sorry.
now it's a 3rd or 4th.
Or is it 2 to the third part? Okay.
So can we,
Yeah, so,
because I know you're gonna be toppling off soon, and I'm
yeah,
not going to.
you're not, no, I don't think you're gonna be going
So
anywhere.
will you just repeat so that I'm clear
Sure.
of what the motion is?
Yes, that we accept the work that we've done for 6th through 8th grade, and that's, do you wanna repeat it verbatim? I always make stuff up, but, the motion is that we accept the work that we've done, and that is our that is the basis for our 6th through 8th work. It's going to be what we base our work on. And that the liaisons report to the State Board of Education that we use the documents we thought were best, and we've developed the standards. That's what we will use to develop the standards for.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Sure. I know it wasn't the same way I said it. I don't remember what I said a second ago.
So we've had a motion and it's been seconded, so all in favor?
Yay! I think
All
6th through 8th then.
You may have to repeat that, because Anne's not here, right?
Yeah, she put it in.
There's a video.
Okay.
I think too, I mean, clarification for myself, I don't think anybody should be worried that we obviously haven't done any kind of final recommendations,
No.
but I think that that is a good way to represent the progress that we've made, and I think that's a very positive thing to do, so.
Absolutely.
I actually wrote a letter to, or email to several of the House of Representatives people, including the chairperson of the Education Committee, and the Speaker of the House, and the sponsor of the bill, and my own representatives in my district, telling them that I appreciated how much work we got done yesterday,
Me too.
and that I thought that we were moving forward for them and for what was in the best interest of the kids from Missouri. And I really thought that it was,
Thank you for doing that.
felt good.
I thought that was good. Yeah.
And I said, parents and educators, and I said we were in the Truman Building, and so we weren't without a lot of distractions, because I think the closer you are, the more distractions
I
there are.
agree.
And here we were, and parents and educators sat together and talked about what was best for Missouri kids,
Mhm.
and got a lot accomplished.
Yeah, that was really good, really good day. It is 8:35. I know that people are wanting to move and go on, so that here's my question is, do we want to at least talk for a few minutes about what we're gonna do when we all convene back, before somebody makes a motion to adjourn, or, we wanna go at this point, so I think middle school is fairly well outlined. And as Tiffany said, you're gonna have to come back and say, oh, wow, we really loaded up 6th grade, we need to do some things, that's always gonna happen. We can bring back to the group, but after we come back, what is our plan?
I do think just, to kind of get in on that, I think my personal plans are to just walk across the street to the meeting, and part of that's, it's just my personality, I wanna do everything all the time. So, I wanna be everywhere, I wanna see everything, so, but, I also, recognizing that it is a big deal for us to all be together, so I don't wanna spend more time than is needed, so I'm not going to, even Terry coming or going, I'll be back, as quickly as possible. But we do need to talk today, do we not, about, in general, both how we spend our afternoon, and then also about, because, we're only gonna have so much time today, and obviously we all know we're not gonna finish this in 2 days. So, but, to talk about, next meetings, the process for that, things like that, and how, I forget who I talked to about this, but, if the logistics, it was you, Kathy, I remember now. The logistics of, how, if we can do some writing, or if we, and I don't know what those restrictions are, but we want to have those conversations, and so.
It seems like, I think we ought to be able to. We all do homework, we all read and prepare. It seems like we should be able to take general things we've discussed, like about the middle school, and have a group start working on putting them together. Of course, it's not done until we all approve it and go through it, line by line, but I think that would really make our time productive,
our FaceTime to
yes,
be very, yeah.
other than us all sitting here trying to write every single standard.
I agree
Yeah,
with that.
we'll be here for 6 years.
Well, and I mean, like, high school things, I don't have a lot of input on wording and things like that for high school, because I don't know, I'm not in that world every day like you guys
But
are.
we'll need to bring it all together to see how it goes together anyway.
But we also need you to be there for Algebra 1, and we
Right.
talk about that, and some geometry, because you're gonna have
What's
impact, yeah, because you're gonna say, oh, well, but we're not really doing a good job at that in that school, so we do need that.
Well, I just meant when it came to actually writing them.
Yeah, oh, yeah, exactly, input we definitely need.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think those are things, but I think Julie, this afternoon, we have to get dates down, because we have to look at our calendars and see what's gonna work, and find places to meet. And then also find out what you said about, can we have a work group once it's outlined, can the school start to write it and bring it back to the group, so those.
Because I don't think, I mean, in terms of like sunshine laws and things, those are not meetings of this group, those are homework. You know, we don't have to have the public open when we're reading the things we read. When we make those drafts, I don't think
Yes,
that has
just
to
a
be a
draft.
public meeting, it's when we come together and look at it, it's
Yeah.
a public meeting, so.
Yeah, I agree with that, so, I think those are things that we definitely need to get done today, because we've got to send it out to everybody, because of people that are not here. And they may or may not be involved in the writing process, but when we come back and look and review, everybody needs to have an opportunity to be here and look at it and discuss. So I think those are really important elements that we do that's a definite thing to get done this afternoon. As well as, I guess, when we come back to start looking at the high school standards. So, with that said, I mean, I don't think we leave before we leave, and I think Margaret and Tiffany are gonna report to the, you're our liaison, so they'll report whatever we get done, to the committees. And then we also, as Ann said, before the end of the day, since we kind of have 6th to 8th grade outlined, we need to get some actual things to the K through 5 groups, so they know where to look from. And then do as much as we can with the, high school to get started. Because I think the next time we reconvene is the 22nd, 23rd.
I thought it was
Oh, 23rd, 20th and 21st. Yeah. When we, all these dates are in.
Yeah. I think it's the
20th and 21st. So with that, yeah,
So I
so.
was gonna say, so when we come back and look at high school, are we looking at the meds, are we looking at ACT, are we looking at the actual standards, what are we gonna look
Good question. Yeah, because there's so much, and the ACT is what the kids are being tested, but I agree with Julie. I don't want that to be our point of discussion, because it's a private company, and, you know, that was what the administrators from the state wanted. So Destin's doing what they asked them to do, but, I'm not a real, you know, that's up to them. So anyhow, yeah, so it is what it is, but we do need to look at them, and I can tell you when we've written standards before, we looked at them as, at the end as a guide, we didn't make sure that we got, those kids would be prepared if they took the test, but that wasn't a guiding document. Okay, we also looked at NAEP to make sure our kids were prepared for the NAEP test as well, so we made sure those tests had
It
that.
seems to me that we're most productive when we're looking at these two documents side by
We got
side,
really productive in that.
so I would propose that.
Yeah, okay, that's fine with me.
And I guess I would even suggest that if groups get together to write them, that it's distributed at least a week before, so that one has time to actually look it over at home.
Really?
Yeah. There was just coming together to discuss what was written.
I agree.
You mean you don't read it driving in the morning?
Not very well, especially on days like yesterday.
Some people unfortunately do. Okay. So, I think we kind of have a general plan for what we need to get accomplished for this afternoon, and maybe we can start, I mean, I think we worked really, really hard yesterday, so I'd like to make sure we try to end by 3 or earlier, because we worked overtime yesterday. So maybe we can set a time when we start looking at dates, to do that maybe by 2:15, so we can get that done, and an agenda for the next time, because I think it really helps us focus if we know what we're doing when we come back. Cool.
Yeah, and I think that's a good start too, and when we start doing that, I feel like, I just wanna put this out there, but whenever I've been involved in anything where we're changing anything or doing anything different, my philosophy is always talk to the Algebra 1 teachers and see what they need. They are in the hot seat, they've got all that pressure, you know, and so I feel like we need to spend a lot of time figuring out what a really good Algebra 1 course looks like.
Yeah.
Well, it's the gatekeeper to
The
everything else to
foundation.
do, really good Algebra
And
1.
it will decide a lot of other things.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
Yes, it will. So. Do we need a motion to adjourn since folks are gonna be moving to come back.
I'll move we adjourn.
Okay, all of it. Okay, and that would be nobody opposed. Or any, I forgot, did anybody post? Any abstain?
Margaret's in a trance, she's.
I know.